For nearly 20 years, since he'd enlisted at the age of 17, Robert Ely's life had been that of a successful military bandsman. Robert is a homosexual. That fact alone has ruined his career.
20 years of my life that just disappeared overnight. You can't forget that.
We will not have homosexuals in our midst. And if we find some have got in and they want to engage in homosexual practices, we will get rid of them.
In 1967, a law was passed making homosexuality no longer illegal in Britain. Yet there remains to this day a group of people excluded from that law, those who serve in the armed forces. There, the old tradition still survives. Homosexuality remains a criminal offence, punishable by, at the mildest, instant discharge, and can even lead on to court-martial. This means that young men and women with successful careers and otherwise unblemished records can suddenly find those careers in ruins. From the start, Robert's choice of career had seemed right. He loved the army and he loved music. He showed great musical promise, studied for 3 years at the Royal Military School of Music. At the age of 29, he'd become bandmaster of the 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment. He composed music for them, much of it recorded commercially. He'd won prize after prize. It was he who started the appeal fund for the Green Jackets killed by the Regent's Park bomb. Altogether, job satisfactions galore.
Enormous satisfaction, yes, yeah. Especially when I became a bandmaster. It gave me the opportunity to hear some of my own music, which was rather nice. It gave me the opportunity to build a reputation as being an effective musician in that sort of work, you know. That gives one enormous satisfaction.
Did it give you confidence?
Yes, I have to say that since I've left, my confidence was shattered, destroyed completely.
But at the time you were a buoyant youngster with a thriving career.
Yes, yeah.
When you look back on it now, how do you remember it, Robert?
I miss it greatly. I'm not saying every day was a sparkling day. You know, there were bad days, there were good days. But overall, I have great affection for it. And, you know, the people I worked with, I miss an awful lot.
While his public life was open and successful, in private, Robert was living a secret life in the shadows. Robert had known he was homosexual since his early teens. To avoid making it known to the army, he'd drive many miles to make his sexual contacts. At the very point when his career was going well, he was expecting to be made an officer soon, he'd bought a house and let out a room to a young student who happened to be gay. The young man had a friend in Germany who was in the forces stationed there.
One day the phone rang, and it was a call from Germany. And it was this chap, and I said, well, look, I know who you are, and you know me, because this chap also happened to be in an army band. But at those days, I was so paranoid that, you know, that what I said on the phone could be found out, that I said, I'm not going to say anything, but I'll drop you a line and explain things, which I did. He wrote back, almost a relief for him to talk to somebody as well, I feel. And the letters were not about the state of the weather or the country or anything like that.
They were sexual.
They were about... yes, in some respects, yes. They were about how we felt, the isolation issues, and also the sort of sexual frustrations of it all. I forgot about those letters, because we wrote a maximum of twice. I can't even remember how many times we wrote now.
All Robert's certificates and awards, his professional achievements, would account for nothing when those letters came to light. It seems the SIB, the Special Investigation Bureau, that's the military's own CID, while investigating the servicemen in Germany, had turned up Robert's letters. They were enough to bring them knocking on his door. After nearly 20 years, his secret had been discovered.
They knocked at my door at 9:15 on a Saturday morning, on June the 7th. I can't forget that date, you know. And I was actually packing to go on tour with my band, and I can remember I was still in my dressing gown because I was sort of sorting things out, so I sort of let them in, didn't realise that it was me they had come to see. When they, declared why they were there, I said, well, do you mind if I get dressed first? So I went upstairs, and I remember going into the bathroom, looking in the mirror and thinking, well, that's it. Simple as that. I just remember just looking in the mirror for a while, and then sort of normal ablutions and getting dressed. And I came downstairs, and I said, well, the allegation is probably true, now what happens?
But this was you that you were looking at in the mirror, the real
yes,
you.
yeah, probably for the first time in my life.
Robert was to be interrogated for 2 days. He was kept incommunicado under mess arrest for 5 days. First, his house was searched from top to bottom to see if diaries and letters might reveal other contacts, just as his own had done in Germany. The SIB are assiduous detectives in tracing every conceivable link and letter. Robert had then to answer pressing questions of the most intimate nature.
Two that stick in my mind, that I find totally repulsive, even to this day, was they said, you've got 2 brothers, you must sleep with them. And I find that totally repugnant. And I'd had a dog for 7 years who was almost like, she was well known around the battalion. She even went on as a mascot on Cardiff Tattoo once. You know, she was very well known, Old English Sheepdog. And they said, oh, you've got a dog, you must sleep with it. You know, I just felt physically sick.
His entire life was in shreds. The career, the status, the income, the music, all had gone. Robert was allowed home on paid leave until less than 3 months later, on August the 29th, he received his discharge. The reason given, services no longer required. He was allowed no defence. There is no defence. To be an active homosexual in the services is itself to be guilty. In the last 4 years, over 300 men and women serving in the British Armed Forces have been dismissed or discharged for homosexuality. The contrast to values prevailing in civilian life is vivid.
I should be really happy because I can live my life. I can be open about my sexuality. I don't have to be embarrassed by it anymore, or embarrassed by the jokes, etc., etc. But there's nothing else in my life now. Because of the only thing I ever wanted was taken away from me without any forward planning. I've not been able to put anything in its place.
At the London bookshop Gaze the Word, Elaine Chambers runs discussion groups for lesbians. She's 30 now and back in civilian life after over 5 years in Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps, known as the QAs. When she signed up, her notice paper set out terms of her employment. She's been rereading it recently. It says nothing at all about lesbianism. Yet in 1987, she'd been forced to resign for behaviour the service condemned.
In my naivety, I think I'd sort of thought that there was this tacit understanding that because there were so many lesbians in the army, and because lesbianism isn't illegal in the civilian sense, I think I just thought it wasn't really going to be a big problem. It's only once you're in there that you sort of begin to think, no, there is a problem, I could get into trouble, but it's never laid out clearly, and I had no idea of the kind of experience I was going to have. I had no idea that that kind of thing could happen, you know.
It came as a complete shock.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't believe it. My whole career was just ended virtually overnight.
Elaine Chambers was a successful QA nurse. In her 3rd year, she'd got a commission. The following year, she expected to be made a captain. She'd been posted to Germany and had applied for midwifery training. Things were going well. But encounters in the service had made her realise where her sexuality lay.
I met my first lover very shortly after joining, which was quite ironic. But the sad thing was that we got posted separately. So I got posted to Germany and she stayed in England. And that caused me great confusion because it confirmed everything I'd suspected, that yes, I was definitely gay. It just absolutely no doubt about it in my mind after that. And then being posted apart was sort of difficult anyway.
That friendship was itself to have unhappy consequences later on. But in the years that followed, she had several relationships with men. Then in 1987, she had 2 further contacts with women. A one-night stand with a heterosexual fellow officer, and what amounted to a drunken session with another nursing officer. Elaine thought nothing of it, and thought that they too had let the matter pass. Then, on a Friday morning in August, she got a sudden shock.
I was called to matron's office one morning and was told allegations have been made that you have indecently assaulted and made advances of a sexual nature to 2 of your fellow officers. What have you got to say? Well, you can imagine I was just absolutely astounded, and I said, well, it's simply not true, So she said, well, in that case, because you're denying it, I've got to investigate this. So she sent me off, and I was on a split shift that day, so I went back to my room, and because she'd mentioned investigation, that made me think, oh God, SIB, they're going to be involved. So I went back to my room in the mess, put all my letters, diaries, any books, any reference at all that I thought, was relevant, that was what, might have painted me as homosexual, into these carrier bags, and I was desperately searching for someone to hide them for me. And my closest friend in the mess wasn't there, and my other friend, still in the ranks, was on holiday. So I went back to work, very naively, 4:45 on a Friday afternoon, thinking, well, the SIB aren't going to come down from Celle all the way down to Hanover, on a Friday afternoon. They'll all be off for the weekend. I'd been back at work half an hour when matron rang the ward and said, come to my office immediately.
And you've got the evidence on you at this point?
Yes, I had this horrible image flashing through my mind. It was quite funny even at the time, thinking, oh God, there's these 2 bags on the bed saying evidence, this woman has indulged in lesbian activity. Even though it was over 4 years previously, it's enough for you to know that's it, your career's over.
Did they make you feel ashamed?
They did when they got to my room, because they put on latex gloves to search my room. I don't know why. I'm not quite sure what they were afraid of catching, or I really don't know to this day, but it's quite funny in retrospect. But at the time I just remember thinking, what are you doing that for? And I was in a small room, just one room in the mess, and it took them 3 hours because they went through all the pockets in all my clothes. They opened every drawer, every cupboard. They pulled books out of the shelves, all my records. They looked through every single of my photographs, and I've got thousands of them.
For 9 hours of the investigation, the SIB pressed Elaine for more and more names. The diaries and letters were ransacked for contacts, however long ago, however far away. Again, the services proved diligent in hunting down army contacts they suspected, determined to exterminate what they obviously regard as dangerous contamination.
They went to Munster and searched it was my first lover's married quarters. She was married by now, and they took apart her married quarters and made her admit that she and I had slept together 4.5 years previously, by threatening her, by saying, if you don't admit this, you're making this officer out to be a liar, this officer might go to court-martial. They even apparently showed her part of my statement to make her admit to having slept with me. So she will almost certainly have lost her army career because of admitting that. The whole thing literally ended up going round the world, in that a friend of mine who was out in Hong Kong, who'd been in the army, I believe, 12 years, just because we'd exchanged letters, she was made to leave. An ex-lover of hers that she hadn't been out with for quite some time, who'd been in even longer and was in a higher position, was made to leave. This is someone I hardly even knew. I'd met her about once, just on the basis of letters. I mean, the guilt you feel at the time as if it's your fault.
As both Robert and Elaine's professional lives in the services over many years were beyond reproach, they both leave with no mark on their record, clearly it's exclusively their sexuality that's got them dismissed. So for what reasons do the services rule so inflexibly and absolutely against anyone who happens to be homosexual by nature?
It's disruptive, and it's something which the majority of those concerned do not want to have in their midst, and since they would have to live with it all day and every day and not have the relief of it being somewhere else in off-duty time, it is the more of a burden to them.
The army exists in a series of really 4 5-man teams, very small units. Those small little teams eat together, sleep together, drink together, go out at night together, come back and all sleep in the same room. You're talking about building up very tight relationships. If you introduce one member in that team who is not the same as the other people, you are then going to introduce tensions which were not there, and you are clearly going to upset the efficient running of the military. It may not be right, but that's the way the military is, and they're not going to deliberately introduce anything which is going to upset that balance.
I believe, sincerely, that they really don't understand that it's a managerial problem and nothing more. Exactly the same as they've said for many, many years that it's not possible for men and women to work alongside each other. It's a managerial problem. It's not anything more or anything less.
What harm does it do?
It is bringing into barracks that which we do not permit for heterosexual relationships, and we are not going to have it for homosexual relationships. But more than that, there are extensions on the homosexual side. It would lead to the possibility of favourite treatment. It would lead to the development of relationships between people in an hierarchic structure, which would be very undesirable indeed.
I've been collecting case histories from other people to really try and show that, contrary to what is said by MOD, that people are not disruptive. None of the people I've been in touch with have been disruptive in any way, shape or form. Every one of them has an exemplary character.
The problem does not lie, curious enough, with the homosexual. It is not his problem, of this circumstance. He may be a very, very good soldier, I'm sure. I mean, there's no reason to doubt that. There's no reason why they should be any better or any worse than any other soldier. The problem lies within how other people see him, how other people's values are imposed upon him. Other people will say, oh, he's a homosexual, he's immediately going to be trying to get into bed with me, he's going to sneak into my bed at night, or whatever. And it's their attitude towards them. Clearly that's wrong, but it's unfortunate for the homosexual that he is the one and they are the many.
There is a broader issue than the efficient running of the services. It is one addressed by accepted attitudes to homosexuals in the civilian world. What is right or wrong in the way individuals are treated?
In any sense of natural justice, in any sense of equality of individuals, then it is manifestly wrong. But that's not how the army works. The army, what is right for the army is not what is right for the rest of humanity, because of the unique circumstances in which the army or any of the services operate. You are dealing with, ultimately, a question of people's lives.
I don't want people to think that we're asking for sort of carte blanche to go around sort of, holding hands on the parade ground and being terribly open and outrageous to the sort of detriment of the corps or whatever. But it's just to have that basic right to express a side of your personality in private, basically, knowing that you are safe to do so, and that you can have those basic rights of not worrying, not thinking, is my phone being bugged, or, is my mail going to be interfered with if I'm thought to be lesbian or gay?
The concept of a private life doesn't really exist if you're a single soldier living in a barrack block in Germany. Effectively, you have no private life. You get up in the morning in an army block, you dress in army clothes, you go out in the evening and all your friends are army people, you drink in army bars and you sleep in an army bed.
Everywhere else in society, even the police are beginning to see that they've got to acknowledge that we do exist. We are basically the same as everybody else, with, I think, the same rights.
I've had letters from people saying that they think our behaviour is disgraceful. Fortunately, we run on a voluntary system and nobody is pressed into the services. And this applies equally to people who say homosexuals should have rights. And I say, absolutely. Homosexual behaviour between consulting adults is something we should support. But those rights do not extend into the army because we do not want something that will interfere with the free running of the system.
In other cultures, the military have not always been so insistently heterosexual. The Greek Alexander the Great, one of the world's greatest generals, was known for his devotedness to his fellow general Hephaestion. Japan's samurai had their pages. More recent historical accounts tell of the tender male friendships important to General Gordon, Lawrence of Arabia, Kitchener. In such an exclusive and intensely male world, often among shared dangers, it's hardly surprising that young men should form strong bonds of a particularly close kind. The Reverend Jeff Garner of St Mary's, Bow, has been a priest for 20 years. Before that, he served 9 years in the Royal Engineers. He believes the army today, without realising it, is still using such feelings.
The army's never really thought the thing through at all. That it actually uses the sort of the comrade love, as it has been called, between young men as a bonding force. And certainly, I mean, in basic training, the men are forced together. They, on occasions, are running around naked together in showers and changing for PT and things like this. The whole thing's used to build up and to bond a group of people together and to mould them into soldiers. If you look at it in one sense, it's a sort of a homoerotic thing, that their feelings are one to another, and women have no part in it. And of course, for centuries, the army never really bothered much about soldiers' families. It was just soldiers with soldiers and so on. And the army still uses this, almost basically and instinctively. But it doesn't actually understand the mechanisms that are involved there, and that for some people it may well be that this leads on into a very deep personal and even sexual relation with just one member of that same troop.
And when it gets as far as homosexual acts or bonds between two individuals, the army is then suddenly very punitive.
Yes, and I think this is part of the fact that it doesn't understand what it's actually done. And so the only way is to sort of slap you on the wrist and say, stop it. The only sanctions that the army knows about, which are rather blunt, but they're sanctions nevertheless, is to throw people out.
Change in service law is now a possibility. In mid-May, the All-Party Select Committee on the Armed Forces Bill recommended that homosexuality be decriminalised in the services. But it did not require the services to accept it. In other words, it would still be a matter for administrative dismissal.
That is only a very small step, and it will not stop people being arrested like I was for 5 days, or the number of cases that I now have information on. And it seems to be round about the same for most of them who were arrested, round about 4 or 5 days. It will not stop the in-depth questioning and the degradation that they put you through.
Lobbies among ex-service personnel like Elaine and Robert, who gave evidence to the Select Committee, are pressing for change.
I think it could happen, and I think it's more likely to happen from outside, because obviously if you're in the forces now, no matter what you might be thinking about it, you know you're in that horrible situation. But how can you fight it from within? Because you can't make a declaration because you lose your job.
I've had 1 or 2 people said, you know, thank God you're prepared to speak out, because we can't.
Even a small group of serving officers, in fact serving chaplains, think change is needed. The Reverend David James served for 15 years as chaplain in the Navy.
I think it is something which eventually will have to change. I'm not sure it's going to have to change the whole way, but I think there must be a much more informed and understanding view towards homosexuality. Not because it's something that's on the increase, but because it's there, and it is far more recognised as being part of everyday life. So I think it is a question that the Navy must address itself to.
What points would you like them to consider?
I'd like them to consider the fact that being a homosexual is not necessarily something which is going to harm naval life if that person acts responsibly as a homosexual. I think that should be honoured, and it should be regarded as being something which is part of life, and people who are homosexuals have something to offer to service life as the same way as they do to every part of life.
The change will come, I'm sure. I mean, you have to look at the colour bar, which until very recently, I mean, we're talking about, you know, the mid-60s, there was a ban on coloured recruiting. Well, now you are seeing that changing. I wouldn't hold the army up as a paragon of racial equality, but nevertheless, attitudes are changing within that.
Of course, the services will do what the government of the day and Parliament decide, but it might have a backfire to it that Parliament and the government of the day would find politically more than they would like to accept.
In what way?
Well, I think that there would be quite strong feeling in the services about it, and that people would express an opinion which I believe would find a popular response amongst the public.
But that would be to stir up anti-homosexual passions, wouldn't it?
Well, it might do. It would be a very unfortunate thing if it did that. But I think that it's one of those cases where soldiers, sailors and airmen might feel they had a right to speak out. And I think they would probably have right on their side.
The army will exist and will continue to do what it sees is right for itself. And if you try and impose values upon it, which are not there, those values will not be accepted. And fine, they'll be told you are to recruit homosexuals. Homosexuality should no longer be a bar for recruitment. Fine. You will just find another excuse why, if an avowed homosexual, someone who openly declares himself to be a homosexual, comes forward recruiting, the army will find a way of dealing with it. You have to look, I mean, ask yourself, how many black generals are there in the British Army?
We don't want any special exceptions, you know, from the general rules, but you just want to be allowed to exist and to be acknowledged as having a right to exist as a lesbian or gay person, and yet still to be able to serve Queen and country.
Those discharged or forced to resign because of their homosexuality have a rough time at first in civilian life. There is no shape, often no purpose to their lives. Elaine felt bitter and angry. She had harmed no one. Indeed, all the charges against her had been dropped. Yet the lifestyle she loved had been abruptly snatched from her. Now she's working as a nurse in an old people's home. Soon she's to take exams to get nursing work in America. Above all, being open about her sexuality has brought a new freedom everyone who knows her remarks on.
They've all said what a difference there is in me now. I'm so much more confident in myself, and I'm just happier. You know, I've found lots and lots of other lesbians who are free to be lesbians and aren't embarrassed about it, and in fact are proud of it almost, you know. And that is an amazing difference, not having to hide it anymore, not having to sneak down to sort of silly pubs or, you know, to sort of whisper with your friends, or just that feeling of sort of guiltiness. It's really lovely just to be able to be yourself.
What do you make of it now, the whole attitude of the services, that the services took to your being a lesbian?
It's still a complete mystery to me. Why is it such a problem? I can't understand it. You know, they seem to be very afraid, and I can't understand why. And I also can't understand how that they can look at a person and take absolutely no account whatsoever of how good you are at your job, whether you know, any ability you've got, anything that you've learnt, all that money that they've put into training you up.
Robert Ely has been through a hard time since he left the army. He joined at 17 and didn't know how to function in civilian life. He sold his house, was forced to take a flat, then sold his belongings. Finally, he had to give up his dog. He took on lowly clerical work. Worst of all, the impulse to compose music had gone. He found he was HIV. Now, since giving evidence to the Select Committee, he's getting his self-respect back. He's even beginning to take up music again and planning to enter a composer's competition. Robert and Elaine once had everything going right for them but their sexuality. Now, outside the services, they can live a life in which there's nothing wrong in being homosexual.
It's been a long, long climb, and it's not very far up the ladder at the moment. Speaking to the Select Committee and making contact with people who've been through similar circumstances has really given me a new lease of life. But of course it's not a career. I've one ambition now, and that is to see the MOD change its mind.